Hi, and welcome to the Making the Media podcast with me, Craig Wilson. It's great to have you with us for another episode, delving deep behind the scenes of the news and entertainment industry. In this episode, we're going to focus on the increasingly important topic of data journalism, its role in changing how stories are told, and the way it can expose underlying issues often overlooked in the headlines. Our guest this week is Sunita Bhatti, who's the head of regions for Channel 4 News in the UK. Having started out in newspapers, Sunita worked in a variety of editorial roles at the BBC before taking on the post as Channel 4 opened a new base in Leeds in the north of England. Channel 4 News is known for its distinctive voice and in-depth approach to news coverage, and recently appointed a data correspondent, Kieran Jenkins, as part of a push to use data to provide greater explanation and detail to their stories. So before we discuss data journalism and the way Channel 4 hope it can complement their coverage, here is Sunita explaining a bit more about the ethos of their news programming.
The Channel 4 News brand is very much in keeping with the Channel 4, and that's taking a slightly different look at things and focusing on diversity of voices, diversity of stories, and always with a sort of slight cheekiness, a slight bit of mischief to it. We've got a longer programme than most bulletins have. We're on later, so we're on at 7 o'clock as opposed to, between 6 and 7 as perhaps some of our other competitors do. And I think that we've just got more time to tell stories. Our packages tend to be much longer. We're able to offer more in-depth analysis. And we've got a real passion for those social affairs stories and those investigations. And I think within the UK, that is, that's what the Channel 4 News brand is known for, as well as incredible foreign journalism. And I'm so proud to be a part of this newsroom that's so well known for telling those stories from across the globe. And I've been really amazed at the strength of such a small news gathering team, but to deliver such high-end journalism. And I think that breadth and that analysis means that, we've got a very loyal audience on linear output, but actually a massively growing audience on social media and on those digital platforms as well. So, we're going from strength to strength.
Yeah, so lots of things in there that I think we'll unpack as we talk through the sort of rest of the podcast, Sunita. But let's talk specifically about sort of data journalism and the new correspondent you've created and the unit that you've set up there. You talked there about the fact that Channel 4 has a longer programme, that you're able to explore issues in a bit more depth. What is it about data journalism you think can help tell stories in that kind of way and explain stories in a slightly different way?
So I think that by being able to use data journalism and data, we're able just to unpack a bit more of the story for the audience. I think these days people are so accustomed to getting their news in a variety of media that actually when they're coming to watch us on linear output, or perhaps looking at us on digital platforms, they might well know a lot of the bare bones of a particular story. So we are looking at what's the extra bit of information or analysis that we can provide that tells our audience something that's really important that they need to know about that story. And I think by having Kieran Jenkins in that role, he's a Channel 4 News stalwart. He's been with us since 2012, and he's always worked out of London. He's really passionate and really creative in his storytelling. And I just think Kieran is able to bring to our audience just more of that analysis in the storytelling that we're all within this busy media landscape. We're all trying to find that's something special that separates us. And I think that this is just building on what Channel 4 News has been known for and our reputation. We've had a fact check service that's primarily been delivering on digital. I mean, there's so much information that's out there for people to digest that actually being able to come to a trusted, reliable news service and know what you're getting and having that extra analysis will, I think it's a really interesting time for us.
Yeah, I mean, I often used to think that, access to information for people is greater now than it's probably ever been, but I'm not entirely convinced that audiences are actually better informed than they ever were. And I think part of that is to do with there's so much information that's out there. So bringing it back to this sort of data journalism, is part of it also about potentially identifying stories that are perhaps underreported because you have this opportunity to look at things in a slightly different way compared to, let's say, the more traditional media that are looking for a 90-second or a 60-second package on something?
Absolutely. And I think that when you're looking at stories, often, as you were saying, if you've got a limited amount of time, maybe 90 seconds to sort of 3 minutes, there's only so much information that you can pack in, and you're probably serving a wider general news audience, aren't you? Whereas if what Kieran's doing is perhaps the second element of a sequence, then actually we know that the audience has received those sort of what we in the business would call those top lines, what the audience would see as sort of the most important news of the day. But actually, just to unpack it a bit further, whether that's sort of a deep dive into what's behind teachers going on strike and what are some of the problems with the workforce there, or interest rate decisions and what that impacts, down at a granular level, as opposed to talking in broad terms about mortgages and that sort of thing. I think by using Kieran and focusing on the data, as you say, we can look at stuff in a bit more depth, a bit more detail, and really give our audience some of that greater analysis that we know they want, because we see the fact that they're looking at what we're doing on digital platforms and social media, and it's going down really well.
I think trust is something else that you sort of raised there as well. And obviously Channel 4 News is very much seen as a trusted news brand for all the reasons that you've outlined there as well. How important do you think that is when you're trying to also build that online presence that you've discussed, that there is that trust in the brand to start with?
I mean, I think it's imperative. If you can't trust the brand, then why would you be looking at what they're telling you? And I think as we've expanded our reach across other social media platforms, and of late, predominantly doing more in the TikTok space, I think those younger audiences, as you say, are perhaps being bombarded with information and trying to digest what's right and what's wrong. Whether that's working out what's fake news or disinformation, or just an explanation behind actually what do these figures actually mean. One of the first stories that we did was looking at the backlog on migrants, and how politicians can perhaps talk about a backlog as being a certain set of figures, but actually if you look at it in closer detail, it's because they've set an arbitrary cut-off point, and that's the amount of people that they're talking about, when actually that figure is continuing to grow because time keeps passing. So I think just being able to point to some of those nuances within data is really important, and particularly for younger audiences who are used to getting their information in a digital platform.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned TikTok there. So many of the organizations that we've spoken to, particularly in this season of the podcast, have referred to the importance of TikTok. And I think when TikTok started a few years ago, probably seeing it as a news platform was probably one of the last things that people would necessarily identify with it. One of the things I wanted to ask about was about how the stories are told, because I think data can be something that could be seen as boring. And it's like one of the key things about it is about how it's told. So, I've obviously seen some of the stories that's been done recently. So I'm aware of the new studio that you have in Leeds and how things are told. But maybe explain a little bit about how you take that raw data and then try to make that, interesting and engaging to watch as much as anything else about the information.
Absolutely, and that's a really big challenge. Thankfully, we've got this beautiful data wall, which is sort of 10 feet long, and we've in our news studio we've got 4 robotic cameras, which, don't get me wrong, aren't without their challenges, and our directorial and gallery team are doing a tremendous job of making that all happen. Luckily for us at Channel 4 News, we've got a brilliant graphics department who are incredibly innovative, and they have been involved in each of the stories that we've done and all of the stories that we'll be doing from the start. They are very much part and parcel of the conversation. And so by working collaboratively together, and at the moment, this is a new role, this is a new thing for us. So we, perhaps we'll make mistakes on the way, but we are trying to focus on providing the audience with a question that we are trying to provide an answer to. And hopefully you will have seen, Craig, that Kieran is very much trying to guide the audience through that question and using the data to really explain what the answers are. I think Kieran, unlike perhaps some other journalists who do similar things, has been really keen that he doesn't want to be someone that's stood static at a wall. There's a lot of movement within our graphics. He's moving around and he's explaining what's being unveiled in the screen alongside him. So hopefully through that kind of meticulous storytelling, I would describe it as, really guiding the audience through, that I'm hoping that we'll be putting through in a way to our audience that perhaps some of our competitors just aren't able to.
And do you see there's an appetite for that on all of the platforms that you're serving? So we spoke at the start that Channel 4 News, it's on at 7:00. It's a longer program. It's almost an hour long, and has been like that for a very long time. So while other news channels in the UK have perhaps moved around their 9:00 bulletin, their 10:00 bulletin over time, Channel 4 at 7:00 has very much been appointment to view for a very, very long time. But taking that information that you're now gaining and translating that into other platforms, that presume that puts some additional pressure, I guess, in trying to tell it in lots of different ways. Because I think one thing that's come up again through the podcast is that if you create something once and just try and distribute the same thing everywhere, it's not necessarily going to work. So how does it work when you're trying to tell the story online as well as on linear? And even online, there's different flavors of what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. And I think having a bespoke offering for digital platforms is really important. As I said, we've got this beautiful 10-foot screen, but actually, what does that look like when you're looking at it on your phone? And actually, does it look really small? Can you really understand what the graphs are telling you? We've got these smaller video walls, and so we'll be experimenting with what we can put in those spins and how they might work and how that might be better for a digital platform. And actually, do we need to be a bit more simplistic and break out some of the key points within the data that we're trying to tell the audience about? But I think ultimately, Craig, it's going to be a bit of experimentation with what works and sort of what the audience feedback is. But actually, even just putting what we delivered for the programme onto certain platforms, they've still performed really well, which has been a bit surprising for us. We know we're going to have to develop that, and we know that we can't just take it for granted that we can just, in and out and slot it into a digital platform. But it's really interesting that even just that offering has done really well for us. And I think that just points to the appetite from the audience to have things explained to them in greater depth.
A couple of things that you said there about, one is about experimentation. And the other interesting thing that you said was that you yourselves are still trying to figure it out. I think a lot of people, looking from the outside, they think, oh, it's Channel 4 News, it's the network. They've got all these things actually worked out in itself. So is it important for Channel 4, not just on this initiative, I guess, to experiment, to try new things and to see? And I guess the other thing is about having the editorial freedom to go and do it.
mean, I think that's what Channel 4 News is about. It's what it's always been about. It's always been offering something that's different. I mean, it prides itself on sort of being unconventional, and not but unconventional sake, but deliberately to try different things, to push boundaries, and to showcase the diversity of views and the diversity of stories. On the programme, we also have, as well as having stories by our journalists, we also have a number of stories that come from EDs out and about across the country who are pitching stories into our newsroom. So I think it's just part and parcel of what this programme is about and what it's been about historically, that, we shouldn't be scared of experimentation and innovation, and it's what ultimately makes us better.
Another area around the use of data that I know some people are looking at is actually how AI can perhaps help in identifying patterns in stories as well. And I know AI is being used in things like the Panama Papers to scan enormous data sets and things like that as well. So is that part of the role, if you like, is to then analyze, okay, where is it that something like AI can actually help us here?
So it's interesting because this feels like a recent conversation that we were having within the newsroom, actually, talking about AI and what the benefits and what the negatives are. I mean, lots of journalists who you will have spoken to will be using AI to translate interviews. So they've got, a written version of what they filmed or what they've recorded. As you talked about, data mining is just sort of, something that people are using AI for, and the Panama Papers is a really good example. I think also coding is becoming increasingly important for when you've got those large data sets and you're looking to pull information together in relevant ways. And as part of preparing for our chat today, Craig, I was told that our directors use AI for Aston delivery. And that's just part and parcel of the workflow. So I think AI will inevitably be part of, one of the tools that we use to help uncover these data-driven stories. I mean, gosh, how it works today will probably be very different to how it might work in a month's time or 2 months' time or 6 months down the line, because it's evolving so quickly. But I think that we've got such a high caliber of journalists that work on the programme, that are working on this particular data journalism unit, that, it will be very much human-led, which seems like a strange thing to be saying, but, there are journalists and real people at the forefront of the stories that we're trying to uncover.
Yeah, in one previous podcast episode, we spoke to the innovation editor of ABC News in Australia, and one of the phrases that she used was the importance of the human in the loop. And actually, what the AI is doing is actually assisting the journalists,
absolutely,
as opposed to being something that's seen as a sort of threat to them, if you like. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of phrase to use. It was about the human in the loop, and it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about that as well. Coming back to the issue around data journalism itself, so you've only just started with it. It's something it's relatively new. And the other thing that's new is your move to the studio in Leeds. So Channel 4 News, historically always based in London, produced out from studios in London as well. Why feel the need to have this second base, if you like? And what do you think it's going to add to the programme to have it?
So I'm really glad that you used the word base, because we're not just a regional outpost of the main programme. We are, on an even footing. And initially, the drive for a second operational base was sort of hand in hand with the work that Channel 4 was doing, and looking at spreading its workforce across the country. And I think lots of other media organisations have done similar things. and there were lots of people that were pitching for, lots of cities pitching for Channel 4 to come and, build their headquarters here. It was somebody who lived in Leeds for more than 20 years. It was fantastic when we knew that investment was coming to this city. And it's, I wouldn't be working for Channel 4 News had they not come to Leeds. I'm very much aware that it's given me personally an opportunity, and I'm hoping that it will give lots of other journalists an opportunity to continue their careers outside of London and not feel that they have to go down to London to have those opportunities. I think what this newsroom gives us is an opportunity to be embedded within a community that isn't London's, have people working in a different area and going to do their shopping in a different area and catching their buses in a different way or getting the trains in a different way, and all of those lived experiences that are important when you're looking for stories, because you just hear things with a different set of ears and you hear different problems. I think Channel 4 News has always prided itself on telling stories from across the UK as well as across the globe. And I think having a presence in another location really adds to that. In this newsroom, we don't just have journalists that are working for the linear output. We've got digital focus staff as well. And one of the things that I'm really keen to develop is that closer collaboration. And I'm sure lots of people have told you the same thing, Craig, about the importance of people working across platforms as opposed to working in their silos. And the benefit that we've got with this newsroom is that we're not embedded with our sort of traditional ways of working, because most of us are new to the newsroom or new to Channel 4 News. And so actually we can innovate in a way that perhaps wouldn't have been possible if you were just trying to start with a new team at Gray's Inn Road where the London team are based.
I think a lot of what you've spoken about there is about diversification of voice, if that's the maybe right phrase to use for it. I think there's a temptation, and not just here in the UK. In the UK, a lot of people talk about the news as London-centric. It's Westminster-centric because it's dominated by politics. I think in Washington, they talk about people not seeing things outside the Beltway. So there's a similar, aspect to things there. So how important is it for Channel 4 News to have that diversification of voice, not just in the coverage, but also in the people that actually work for the organisation? Because that can provide a completely different set of views, set of expectations, and set of story interests, I guess, compared to perhaps a more traditional organisation that may be based in the southeast of England.
I mean, it's massively important, Craig. And as you say, if you have people with different interests and different life experiences, then they're bound to bring you different stories. I think all media organisations are trying to get to stories that really resonate with communities and audiences. And if you're only based in one particular part of the country, whether it's London or the southeast, then it's naturally going to be harder for you to tell those different stories or go to find those different experts that might give you a different look. I mean, one of the benefits that we have by being here with a studio here as opposed to a bureau, we're not a bureau. We've got a studio here and we're delivering half of the programme from our lead studio and have been since last year, is that we can also get guests and experts and analysts in that also have that different lived experience, so that we are telling stories from what feels like a three different eyes, and it means that we've got that plurality of voices that I think perhaps other news programs perhaps struggle to do. And I do think that there's, as wonderful as technology has been to enable us to reach people in different parts of the world, be it on Zoom or Teams or whatever communication means you can. It's been a massive leveler, and it's really helped broadcasters to get to different voices. The fact that we can get people to Leeds who wouldn't be able to come to our studio in London unless it was, tied in with something else they were doing, means that we can speak to them and we can get more stories from them, and it just builds and builds and builds. And I think, it only is a good thing for the programme, and it will only continue to be a good thing for the programme.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke earlier on about, data and how you're using, data to identify new stories and things like that. What about internally? Are you also using data to analyze what you're doing as well? Because one of the things, I guess, that there's overnight audience figures, which is one thing, but because you've got the online presence now, that can give you different kind of data analytics as well. Is that something that you also try to take into consideration now?
I think it's something that all newsrooms are having to do, aren't they? And I think on digital platforms, almost there's an abundance of data, and you can see, minutes watched and total minutes viewed, and where are they? Where in the world are they? Who are they? What are our demographics? Absolutely. Those KPIs are massively important in order to be able to analyze whether you're reaching the audiences that you were hoping to reach with particular stories. And let's be honest, we're hoping that those digital audiences are predominantly younger, so that we're growing our audience. We're growing our audience so that we're future-proofing ourselves. But I also think it's really interesting to see, well, where did the drop-off occur? And what happened there? Why didn't that work? If we look at something like TikTok, obviously people are just scrolling, aren't they? And those seconds played, and whether you get the top right is massively important. So I think being able to take a deep dive look into how your content is performing is really important. And actually, it's a bit of a rabbit hole that you can get lost in as well.
Yeah, I mean, journalism is changing. I still think it's a very exciting industry to be involved in. I think it is. There's lots of challenges along the way that the organizations face. But I think telling stories in different ways, having different platforms and different ways that you can tell stories, I think is really kind of important and significant as well. One thing that's come across, Sunita, is I think your kind of enthusiasm for the role that you're in, the location that you're in, and obviously the new unit that's kind of started up. It's still very early days, but where do you see things developing, particularly around the sort of data journalism? What's your kind of focus for, say, the next year?
Oh gosh, that's a big question, isn't it, Craig? I would hope that we are able to really uncover some important stories in the coming year and really be able to point to things that we know we wouldn't have been able to do. And I think that, as I'm looking over at our data wall, I know that there's a load of creativity that we can release in the graphics and the way that we can tell that. And as I've already said, I'm massively blessed with tremendous graphic designers who are able to really bring those stories to life. So, I would really hope that in the coming year we're able to do some really innovative and groundbreaking work, which feels like a tall order. I step myself, but why not? Why not AI?
You've got to have ambitions. There's no doubt about that. And it's always better to aim high and to aim for great things. Sunita, it's lovely to talk to you. I think it's a really interesting subject. I think it's something we'll probably explore in a bit more detail in other podcast episodes to come. But there is one question I ask everyone in the podcast. So I will ask you. And that question is, what is it, if anything, that keeps you up at night?
So I've been thinking about this, Craig, because I knew that this question was coming. And aside from my children, because I've got young children, it's got to be data sets now, hasn't it? and making sure that we're interpreting the data in the right way, because actually when you're massively embedded in a story, the worry has always been, and it's as true with data as it is with other stories, when you're massively embedded in a story, there comes a point where you think, goodness, am I too close to this? Is this as important as I think it is? And you always just need to take that step back, don't you, and have a look and be like, no, we're absolutely doing the right thing. We're on the right track. So it's those spreadsheets and making sure that we're on the right tracks, I'd say, Craig.
Whoever thought that spreadsheets could be keeping journalists up at night, eh? So thanks to Sunita for taking the time to talk with us, and we look forward to seeing what stories they uncover. Now, if you enjoyed what Sunita had to say, then why not subscribe to the podcast to get notified when new episodes are released? Please share, like, and review the podcast to help spread the word. Check out the show notes for links to an article on how newsrooms are using technology to drive collaborative workflows, and a recent webinar on new innovations which Avid is delivering. Please get in touch. You can follow Avid on all the major social media sites. I'm on both Twitter and Instagram as CraigAW1969, and you can always email us at makingthemedia@avid.com. That's all for now. Thanks to our producer Matt Diggs, thanks to Sunita for joining us, and thanks as always to you for listening. We really do appreciate your support. Join me, Craig Wilson, next time as we chat in detail with the people making the media.